This is the Money Loves Women podcast, the podcast that guides women to wealth and an extraordinary life. Here's your host, Dr. Deborah Ekstrom.
This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom for the Money Loves Women podcast. Today, I'd like to welcome Lindsay Hardie, PhD. She's a wealth psychologist, and she's the founder of Sierra Legacy Consulting, LLC. She coaches individuals, couples, and family enterprises. And she has married into a wealthy family, so she can come at this from a really personal point of view. She likes to share her principles for approaching relationships with creativity rather than reactivity, and we're going to hear more about that today because most of us find that a little bit challenging. She does have her doctorate degree in clinical psychology, and she has trained in mindfulness-based therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's been validated by hundreds of clinical trials, so we know that it works, and it's all valid, and it works around the world as a frontline treatment. She has a private psychotherapy practice working with individuals and couples, and later on she transitioned to her current coaching practice, focusing on assisting individuals, couples, and families who are experiencing challenges in the context of wealth. And we're going to want to hear about that, Lindsay, because sometimes we all think that, if I just had enough money, I wouldn't have any challenges. Of course, that's not true. So welcome to the program. Before we get started on all of this, tell us a little bit about yourself, your growing up years, and what shaped you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, first of all. Yeah, so I grew up, I would say, in a middle-class family. We lived in Palo Alto, which is where Stanford University is located, and also it's kind of at the north end of Silicon Valley. So a lot of tech businesses are in that area, which means that there's also a lot of wealth. So I would say I grew up around a lot of wealth, and our family did just fine, but we were not. I would not say that I identified as wealthy. My dad has a PhD. He's a geophysicist, so he has has always had a interesting and stable career. And my mom worked at Stanford as an administrator.
Okay, great. Did you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger brother, and then maybe just a piece about my grandparents on my father's side. They were both architects, and they were founders of a firm. And so the way that my dad grew up, there was at least a lifestyle that was where there was a fair amount of wealth, but it was never passed down. So there was a legacy, I would say, in my extended family of having some wealth and losing that wealth.
Okay, good to know. So architecture creatives who started their own business. Mm-hmm. And then your father was in academics in a very interesting field. And your mother was exposed to a lot of interesting things at Stanford because she was an administrator there. And Stanford, of course, is...
So a strong value around education, both in my immediate family and in my extended family.
And then there you ended up doing a PhD. How did you end up in clinical psychology?
Yeah, it was a bit of a roundabout route. So I think because I really always sort of looked up to my dad, and he had a PhD, and as I said, education was so strongly valued in my family. I always thought I would get a PhD. That just seemed like a given. So it was a matter of what field. And I actually started a PhD program in neuroscience out of college, and spent about a year and a half in that program before deciding that really wasn't for me. So I took a year and I did some soul searching, and I actually got very interested in meditation practices and also in psychology, and then discovered there was this whole sort of burgeoning area within psychology of mindfulness-based therapy, bringing together these two interests.
Excellent. So got involved in mindfulness, and eventually you went into coaching, and that's such a great transition from clinical psychology into coaching. It's very interesting because I trained in psychiatry many years ago, and we didn't have a lot of tools back then. So that was 40 years ago. And that's just when coaching was just starting. And the clinical psychologists actually, and the sociologists that were doing therapy and so forth, were having all the fun, not the psychiatrists who were doling out medications And so we just didn't have a lot of tools. And then I saw coaching come on, and I thought, wow, that's where the power is. Sounds like you drifted in that direction as well.
Yeah, so I think the specific modality that I trained in graduate school is called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. Although I was trained in many different modalities, from psychodynamic therapy to internal family systems therapy and DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. So anyway, there was a lot of training,
lots of things,
along the
way. Lots of good technical training.
Yes.
Yeah.
So ACT was my primary focus because that's my mentor developed that approach, and it really resonated for me with my background in mindfulness and meditation. And yeah, so ACT in particular, I think, is really well suited for coaching. But what brought me to coaching was something different. As you mentioned in the introduction, I married into wealth, and that happened before I graduated from graduate school. And the seed was planted by a family business consultant that's been working with my husband's family for many years, that this was a field that I could consider entering into. He also had a background in clinical psychology. So I kind of had this on my mind that this was something I might want to do. And I, just wasn't quite sure what it would look like. And what I discovered is that the coaching modality really was a better fit than a therapy approach for the type of work that I wanted to do.
Yeah, makes sense. Did you tell me that your husband also has a psychology background?
No, that's the family business consultant that's been working with our family.
Yes, the family business consultant has a background in psychology.
Yes.
So, that's very interesting. How was that marrying into a wealthy family, a family that's had a legacy business 100 years old? That's really an incredible feat, first of all, to keep the wealth going like that. And what was that like?
Yeah.
How were you received?
Yeah, it was quite a journey, and where to begin? So let's see. One interesting thing is that there were three of us marrying in at the same time.
Okay.
So there were three of us that were all kind of having the same experience. And I would say all three of us are actually still very close.
Women? All women?
All women.
Or
yeah.
All women. Okay. So three brothers all getting married at the same time.
Two brothers and a cousin.
Two brothers and a cousin all getting married at the same time, bringing new individuals into the family circle.
Yeah. So I would say, like, one thing they have learned by having, this multi-generational wealth is the importance of consultants.
Yes.
Really to help. And so, I would say that there was some intention and thought put into how to welcome us into the family. And I think overall, the family did a really nice job of that. So we were invited to family meetings as soon as we were married. That's not always the case. I think sometimes people who marry in can feel very much, the term is that they can feel like outlaws, not like in-laws.
Yes.
And can feel very excluded.
Excluded.
Sometimes that's just a factor of, the size of the family. If it's a very large multi-generational family, it's hard to make room for everyone. But these are, usually end up being parents of the next generation. So, it's important for me and for our family to have the in-laws be included, at least to have a voice.
Yes. Well, that's wonderful. It's great that they did that with intention.
Yes.
That's really great.
Yeah. The other topic that, could warrant a whole hour all by itself is that all of us went through a process of coming up with a prenup. And that process was quite challenging. I think it was surprising how challenging it was, because I was completely on board with that, expected that, really thought this could be something that serves both of us. But once the lawyers enter the picture, it's hard for it not to become a bit adversarial.
Yes. Interesting. Give us the highlights besides those things. it's very clear when you have a 100-year legacy for a family business that it's desirable to protect that from fragmentation in case of a marriage breakdown, correct? I mean, that's, as you said, you went into that. I'm sure you were clear about that yourself, that you understood that from their point of view. But I can see where it could get to the point where it feels kind of unfair. You know,
Yeah,
you make, especially,
yeah.
you're making contributions to the family in one way or another, and then down the road, maybe you feel like you could have the rug pulled out under your feet. Is that kind of how it felt?
Well, yes. Well, so first of all, I agree with you. I had complete respect for the family's, desire to protect the wealth and because there are going to be marriages that fail. There are going to be people who marry without good intentions. However, I started to question that whole mindset a bit because the message then to the person marrying in is that they're a risk, right? They're kind of seen as a risk, and that's really not the right message. That's not, I think, the bigger intention of the family. And I think there's a way to construct prenups that really serves everyone instead of having it kind of be serving one or the other, and having it be a bit of a fight that way.
Can you elaborate on that? Is that something you can tell us a little bit more about? Because not only wealthy families do prenups, lots of other people do prenups.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it's becoming more popular actually with the younger generation. And often the intention is actually to protect the person who has less money or who has debt. And to be really mindful going into the marriage, how the couple wants to handle money together and how they're going to help each other. And so I think there's big value in the prenup process of being completely transparent around money and setting the precedent that that's something that is discussed openly. And I really believe there's a way to do it that honors both people. That's less about trying to protect one party.
Yes. Obviously, a facilitator is really necessary for that. What kind of person is a money psychologist the right person to facilitate that? Or who needs to be involved? And how do you avoid spending thousands and thousands of dollars putting that in place?
So that's something that I've become very interested in, actually, and I've coached several couples myself who are in that engagement process, and I've been giving a lot of thought to how to do an even better job serving them. And there's a book that came out recently by a colleague called Engaged, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise by Coventry Edwards Pitts, and I've been sending it to a number of my clients because she, first of all, shares stories from people about their prenup process that in some cases were still emotional many, many years later. And then she provides some really useful pieces of advice. So that's one resource that has helped me think about it differently, but it also fit with kind of how I was already trying to help couples just do this in a more collaborative way.
Yeah, she has a number of books. And I believe that's her most recent one.
Yes,
so worth looking at. She has a lot of insight into, one of her other books was how children do in terms of coming from wealthy families and what the characteristics were of successful children from wealthy families. Because there's lots of kids that come from wealthy families that don't navigate the wealth very successfully. And perhaps because the family doesn't have enough intention around that. And I think it comes partly from not having 100 years of wealth and having a pattern for that and a strategy for that, but maybe from first generation wealth, and then how do you pass that on? And so she has some really interesting things to say about that. And she's a very interesting person anyway. I've been trying to get her on the podcast. We'll see now. Maybe I'll make another effort.
She's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a little in with her because we're in a group together, but we'll see. Sometimes you're at the bottom of the totem pole when that happens. So we'll see how that goes. So that's really interesting information. I want to go into a little depth about a couple of things. And one is, what do you see in your coaching and counseling as the common denominators of things that need to be worked through with couples especially, and with children especially, when you're in a situation of wealth? Because as I said early on, just because you have wealth doesn't mean you don't have any challenges, and it doesn't make you automatically happy. So tell me the sorts of things you work with, what the common problems are.
Yeah. So first I would say that, this idea that you've articulated a few times, that having wealth solves problems. Many people believe that. And what I would say is that I think having wealth can actually exacerbate problems, or even in some cases create problems. I mean, it's a real challenge to try to raise kids with wealth and to have them grow up with the values that you want them to have. And so,
tell me more about that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Something that I see is, often when parents are parenting from fear, that they can end up making choices that result in the exact results that they were trying to avoid.
So what do you mean parenting from fear? Tell me more about that.
I think, what I'm thinking is one common denominator really with both for couples and also for couples in their parenting. So for their relationship as a couple and for them as parents, is to be really transparent with each other around money, and to be able to talk about money, and to do that easily and readily, and with to have a lot of skills around that they can do that in a productive way.
What about kids? What are the challenges for wealthy couples with kids?
Well,
how do they?
This relates to the kids, because I think very often, kids in wealthy families actually, they have a sense of the wealth, but they don't really know. They don't know how much there is. They don't know whether they will be whether they will have access to the wealth, and then if they have access to the wealth, when that will happen. That conversation is often very much avoided by parents who are fearful about how the wealth is going to impact their kids. But the result is that the kids are not then prepared. If they are to inherit wealth, they're not well prepared for that. And it can be what the parents see as a gift can actually end up feeling quite different than that for the children.
It can feel like a burden.
It
can feel like a heavy responsibility. Yes. So I think what you're saying is couples need to not only be transparent with each other, but they also need to talk often and transparently with their own children and tell them what to expect and what not to expect.
Yes, in an age-appropriate way. Like I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and when my kids say, well, how much money do we have? We tell them, well, we will tell you, but at the right time. So there's a process, and actually my husband's putting together a curriculum for our family around, called a money mentorship program. And so it's going to be sort of laying out, starting with allowance for kids when they're preferably at age 6, starting at age 6, and then developing a way for kids to really understand money, to have some mentoring around money, and have outlets to be able to talk about money.
Who will be mentoring them?
So it could be other members of it could be an uncle or an aunt, could be a family friend, could be someone who works for our family office. We have a single family office, so it could be one of the employees there. So there's several options, but the idea is to have someone to talk to that's not a parent.
Yes, so that you don't have all the parent baggage and the kid baggage on top of talking about money. Yeah, great. So it sounds like you guys have a plan, you and your husband within the family have a plan for how to bring your children along in this whole thing. And, is there a tendency, do you think, in wealthy families for children to feel entitled and take the wealth for granted? Is there a tendency for parents to indulge or, just sort of automatically give their children a lot of privileges and experiences and opportunities that maybe the child might not otherwise have, such that they become entitled? And how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think that's very much the stereotype, is that kids who grow up with wealth are going to, and it's a fear that I think a lot of parents have as well, that they will grow up to be entitled. What I see as the most important counter to that, or prevention strategy for that, is having engaged, emotionally available parents. So I personally think it's less about how much money you're giving them, or how much they get for allowance, or how many gifts they get at Christmas. It's more like, do they really feel that their parents are present, that they are loved? And that, what that conveys is a real sense of self. That, when you have that, you're not gonna grow up to be entitled, because you know that you have everything you need inside you.
Yes, very well put. That's very well put. So I think it comes down to, like it does with any other parent, who you're being while you're doing what you're doing. So it is your personal self-development and your personal commitment to parenting and learning to parent and being the best person as well as best parent you can be, in order to make yourself emotionally available, right? So if you're not emotionally steady yourself, and you're seeking your own, still seeking lots of solutions to your childhood problems, chances are you're not going to be available or engaged. And that happens no matter whether you're a wealthy parent or a parent that's struggling. And of course, if you're struggling financially, it makes it even worse in terms of that. So, having enough is certainly a good place to be when you become a parent. A good place to be. Not always happens, but it's a good place to be. So like anything, including growing wealth, who you're being while you're doing what you're doing is really critical to the outcomes for yourself, but really critical to the outcomes for your children, it sounds like. So I think what you're telling me is demonstrating the values that you want your own children to have when they become parents, and demonstrating those so that the children have that ingrained in their psyche, and that helps keep kids from being entitled. And that's a really good answer. Having the situation in place that you're available and engaged with the child. Excellent.
Yeah, so the kids really, they feel that they are important, and that how they feel and what they think really matters in the family, with appropriate, kind but firm boundaries around that as well. Yes. And I think the worry often is, the kids they're gonna get too much, they're gonna take things for granted, and I think it is very important to keep an eye on that. We know from social psychology research that there is a tendency with wealthy people it can lead to decreases in empathy. So I think it's important to keep an eye on. But the other challenge for a lot of people is actually to enjoy their wealth. So I think it's important as parents to also to model that it's okay, and it's, to enjoy your wealth, to allow for, wealth can allow for really beautiful experiences with family members and friends. It can allow for, like, we have a chef that cooks for us once or twice a week. And just when we use that time then to be able to connect more as a family, because we're not busy in the kitchen, that's a real gift. So to be in gratitude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, with your mindfulness background, that's got to be so, so helpful in being in this family situation and coming into this wealth. That's great. That's really great. So I'm interested a little bit in your philosophy around not being reactive in your relationships. So I think doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or not. Being creative in your relationships. I'm interested in hearing from you what that means.
Yes, well, I agree that this applies for anyone. So I in working with a particular family, I sort of put together my principles for effective communication, which involve... Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Name those. We're ready to hear them.
So it starts with an understanding that we all have all that we need inside of us. And so I like to say, when I talk about communication, I'm not talking about communication skills. I'm helping people have an understanding of who they are before they even enter the conversation. And
Yes.
so again, that's why I start with who you are is already complete and whole, and there's nothing lacking. And the reason I start there is, first of all, because that's such a relief, when you really get it. It's such a relief. So many of us are in this fix-it mode all the time. Like, we feel that we have to constantly be fixing ourselves or improving ourselves. And
yes,
when we start from wholeness, that is a very different place to start from. And also what you realize is that if that's really true, if I experience that, then whatever's happening with a family member, I know that I have that place to come back to inside of myself. Even if we have a difficult conversation, it doesn't go as I wanted it to. So it helps when there is a difficult topic on the table to know that I'm not going to be destroyed by that if it doesn't go well, that I don't need the other person to say something in particular for me to be okay. So that's why it's the starting place. And then
that is
realizing
fabulous principle.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then it's understanding that my experience is coming from me 100%. And so it's being created by my own thinking. And so that isn't to say that, people aren't saying what they're saying, they're not doing what they're doing. This is not a philosophy that says what's out there doesn't exist, but to understand that everything we experience is filtered through our own thinking, and that a majority of our thinking is habitual. It comes from our conditioning, it comes from our past, it comes from our childhoods, it comes from our culture, it comes from wherever it comes from. We don't really have to go digging around to figure it out, but we just know that our thinking is always filtering our experience, and that's especially true, or it's very clearly true when we're talking about relationships, because we tend to see other people through a particular lens that's based on the past and not the present.
And these principles that you're talking about, are you finding that when you talk to families, couples, children, whoever you're talking to, children I would think would be better, but are those internalized fairly readily when you begin from that point of view? Or do you find people go, yeah, no, I'm not really enough, I'm not really whole, or no, I'm not really 100% responsible for my reaction and what I'm thinking. That's not me, that's other people coming from outside. So how do you get in that information in the first place? Does that go in when or are people so open to receiving once they come to see you and have you on board? How do you get that in?
Yeah, well, it's highly variable. So everyone is at their own level of understanding, so for some people, this makes perfect sense. They kind of already know it. And so it's very easy to incorporate. For other people, this is very challenging. They've never considered that they might already be whole, or that their experience is coming from themselves. I think most of us, our culture tells us that our experience is coming from outside. It's coming from other people. And
sure. And our experience tells us we're not whole either, right? Because we get brought up as children, and then, don't touch this, don't say that, don't run in the house, don't be loud. And so it's correct, which sends the message, you're not whole, you're not enough yet. We're still molding you, you're still being baked. And I think there's that funny attitude, maybe it's not funny at all, that idea that once you become an adult, you're baked. That there's no more growth or change or any of that, which also is such an interesting idea, right? So yeah, that's great stuff. two great principles. First of all, that you are whole, you have enough, you have everything inside you that you need. And then you are responsible for your experience of your interaction, because you're responsible for your thinking, for your own thinking and the filter you've developed. And until you scrutinize the filter that you've developed, it's very difficult to adjust your thinking, right? If you're not even aware of your filter. So, wow. So you're exposing some really interesting things to people. All right, wonderful. And it sounds to me like you're having good success with that.
Yeah, I find it to be very impactful. And I guess something else I would say about people being at different levels, or different, able to receive this, that when I'm working with a system, a couple or a family, people can help each other. So if one person takes this in more readily, I've seen this, where then other people in the groups see that and they go, oh, well, that person, I'm hearing them like really taking responsibility for themselves. I'm seeing that person really apologizing in a way that is so much more heartfelt than I've heard in the past. And so if that's creating that sort of impact for them, then, maybe I'm a little more open now.
How interesting. So the group dynamic sometimes can create openings.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. What is your biggest challenge in your coaching practice? And what things have you found are the most impactful and successful? Or is this what you found most impactful and successful?
Yeah, I think this is what I found to be most impactful and successful. And as far as the biggest,
Yeah. Go ahead. What are the biggest challenges? Tell us.
Biggest challenge would be, I think, patience. Like, I have faith that anyone can get what we're talking about here. That anyone can discover that they are already whole, that anyone can discover and really experience how their experience is coming from themselves and how that can profoundly shift the way they live. But sometimes people get a little impatient. They want it to happen now. Or if it's not making things better now, then it can feel disappointing. And so I think helping people really get out of sometimes that habitual thinking around that self-critical can be so strong that it just takes some time to unwind.
So what I'm hearing you say is that for some people, this is a revelation for them to see that they could choose how to experience something.
Yes.
So if they're experiencing it in a certain way, they can choose something different. And I suspect you sometimes guide them through that.
Yes, and I'm thinking one of the other principles that I articulate, there's like 8 of them, so I won't go into each one, but another one that's really, really helpful, especially with families and with couples, is to always assume positive intentions.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
People,
tell me what the rest are, because these are incredible jewels, Lindsay.
Yeah. Let's see, something right here. So I'm sort of giving them a little bit out of order. So there's one I skipped over, which is acknowledging separate realities. And so
that not what one person feels is going on is not the same as what someone else feels is going on.
That's right. That we each are, because we're each filtering our experience through our own thinking, which is based on our conditioned thought, our past, our conditioned thought. We're experiencing, what I'm experiencing is different from what you're experiencing, and is different from, my sibling or my parent is experiencing. And that however I'm acting makes perfect sense according to my reality.
Correct.
And this is where people
very
get
important,
very stuck in this, because they think, I would never do that, or how could they do that? And then they go to, well, they do that because, they're selfish, or, they're entitled, or they're greedy. But no one's ever acting from an intention of greediness, I don't believe. Even if it appears that way, that there's always, on some level, there is a positive intention, even if that intention is just, sometimes it's so primal, it's like I have to just keep myself.
I have to grab this because I don't have enough.
Right,
and
I'm trying to
this because I don't have enough.
So if
I'm trying to survive.
Operating a level of like, I'm just sort of in survival, then, they're not going to behave well.
Yes.
They're not going to be
totally
very
true.
easy to be around, but that doesn't mean the intention is negative.
Correct. I like that. Always assume a positive intention.
So those are two are
we all did that everywhere.
But yeah, I mean, if we could all walk around and just acknowledge we all live in a separate reality and other people have positive intentions, we would be much, much, much better off.
We transform the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep going. This is wonderful stuff. Keep going.
Okay. So this one's related to, seeing that your reality is coming from your own experience. When you see that, then you can own your own narrative rather than blaming other people.
Yes.
So if I can really own, like, this is what I'm thinking, and what I'm feeling is a result of what I'm thinking. It's actually because no one else is to blame for that.
Yes.
And we know that because, I can react to the same comment completely differently based on my mood, how much sleep I got, or someone else in my same situation could react totally differently because they just see the situation differently. So it's really
absolutely
my feelings and my thoughts are coming from me. I'm responsible for them. So that shifts the conversation then completely, because if we can eliminate blame, or at least, recognize that blame for what it is, then conversations go much more smoothly.
Yes. Keep going.
Okay. So the next one is clean up after yourself.
Tell us what you mean by that.
This is about forgiveness. And, I'm sorry, first apologizing. It's about apologies, and then hopefully, forgiveness. But apologizing is really an art form.
Yes.
And so, like, that's something I really coach couples and families to do well, is the art of apology. And so there's more to say there, but we'll leave it at that.
Please write a book, would you, Lindsay? Rather than Art of War, the Art of the Apology. I like that title. I don't care if it's 25 pages. Please write that book.
It's an art, but it's actually simpler than it might sound. There's a few steps involved, but it's not, we don't have to make it overly complicated. It's more like just, if we're really being responsible, then we don't do these half apologies like, well, I'm sorry, but you were, being a jerk.
Yeah, I'm sorry you felt that way.
I'm sorry you felt that way.
I'm sorry you were so upset by what I said. That's the non-apology apology.
Yeah.
Yes. So the art of the apology, very good.
Yeah.
Learning the art of the apology, I think, is what you're teaching us here. Yes.
Yeah, and you can see how when you really adopt the principles leading up to the art of apologizing, you're kind of already 80% there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a person in my life who occasionally would do things by accident that should have been apologized for, and that person could not bring themselves to apologize. Mm. And, apologies get easier with practice, in my opinion. That's been my observation. So, but on the other hand, there's the people who say, I'm sorry about everything, which becomes very annoying.
I used to be that person.
I think women fall.
I had to learn to not apologize when it wasn't called for, because that's not effective either.
No, then your apologies don't matter, because everything's an apology.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a defense mechanism, I think. It's like, if I apologize for this, no one can get mad at me.
Yes.
That's how it was for me.
It makes you small too.
Yeah.
When you're apologizing when it's not required.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I'm sorry for apologizing so often.
Right.
Gets out of hand after a while.
This one also, going back to our parenting discussion, I think teaching our kids to be able to apologize is extremely important.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Let's see. So I have a few more. So express appreciation. This is really, really helpful.
Yes.
because it's, sometimes, especially if we're in conflict with someone, we're just focusing so much on what we don't like. And if we can instead intentionally express appreciation, that can shift it can shift our own experience actually of the other person.
Yes, absolutely true. And I think it's so important with children, particularly, who are so vulnerable, but everybody, and especially if you have to ask for something that maybe they didn't perform as well, to do appreciation and then discuss what your concern is, and then another piece of appreciation, because I think we so often look at the critical, right, or what's wrong, and we don't look at the myriad of things that we can be grateful for about that person or appreciate about that person. That's and to constantly find things to be appreciative for.
Yeah. I mean, that's
valuable.
That's just key. I mean, we see people through this narrow filter of what I don't like, what I'm upset about. We're missing out on who they really are.
Yes, and who they could be.
That's right.
Yes. Lovely.
And then
appreciation.
This is totally, related, but it's finding warmth for the other person, and just recognizing that finding warmth and feeling warmth and creating warmth is really the key to healthy relationships. Yes,
finding warmth. It's so interesting. I have found in my relationships with patients that when we find common ground and I show appreciation for who they are and where they're coming from, acknowledge them with warmth, that it creates an unbreakable bond. And they feel so vulnerable when they're coming in to see me. And to have that makes them feel so safe, I think, that it creates a great bond. And it creates huge enjoyment for me as their physician. And these are people, I've never met before in my life sometimes. And it's just so great. And I saw this modeled when I was in my residency training, and we had a emergency room doctor, and he was working on the general surgery service when I was training in general surgery. And I watched him over and over and over with patients and expressing his generosity and liking for them and warmth and positive regard. And the response he got was just remarkable. And that's when I started doing that. That's when I really learned. I'll forever be indebted to Dr. Gary Kuhn for that, for modeling that. He was a year ahead of me in training, and he was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
He did it naturally, I think. I don't think anybody taught him to do it. And perhaps his parents were like that. But it was such a great role model. And once you start doing it yourself, I think you create a role model for other people around you. And if you're not brought up with that, I think it's an acquired skill. And then it becomes self-reinforcing, at least for me, because it gives me so much enjoyment.
That's what I was just thinking, is that because it's so enjoyable, it feeds on itself in a really beautiful way. And it's really the main outcome I'm looking for when I'm working with couples and families is increased warmth in their interactions.
Huh. That's so brilliant. All of this has been so valuable. Are we at the end of the list, or we have more to go?
I have two more. I can quickly. So one is
Keep going.
It's mind your mood, which just has to do with being aware of your state of mind and how that's, if you're in a low mood, if you're feeling upset, not the right time to bring up a touchy topic.
Yes. Or if they're in a low mood or they're angry, don't bring up a touchy subject.
That's right. And
pick your time. Pick your time.
Yes, it's huge, but we overlook this one. So that's it in a nutshell. And then the last one is listen deeply to understand the other person's experience. So this is really about how we listen.
Do you find that in the listening technique that mirroring back to the other person what you heard, or asking the other person to mirror back? Because I'm always shocked when I talk to someone and I think I've gotten through, and then I ask them to tell me what they heard, and it's completely different than what I think I said. I'm going, okay, we have to check in on this frequently to make sure that the communication's happening, that what I think I'm communicating is actually truly what's being heard. And you have to take responsibility for your communication, right? I learned that back. Yeah, I learned that back in landmark education. Take responsibility for your communication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very important.
Yeah.
Can you go right down that list one more time for me, Lindsay?
Okay, there's actually one last one.
One, top to bottom. One left. Let's do the last one.
Okay, it's communicate with clarity and kindness. And this is really about boundaries, but I have come to like the language of clarity and kindness.
Yes.
Boundaries, people get this idea it's this wall that I'm putting up or something.
Yeah.
And I think if we talk about clarity and kindness, that's very simple and easy to understand.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Be clear. That's about taking responsibility for your communication again, right?
Yeah.
And be kind. We don't have an excess of kindness in our world right now. Being kind all the time.
Yeah.
Being kind. Yeah. I love it. You know, it must be so wonderful having you for a therapist, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Because first of all, you're wonderful to talk to. But the second piece is you have a very clear framework around the principles of how to make all this work. So go through that for us. Go through that for us step by step one more time. You were very good at explaining it and embellishing, on that so that we could understand what it really meant. But go through it for us. Review it for us one more time.
Okay, so the first
one. And you don't have to do the order. Yeah, first one
is access the well-being within. So this has to do with understanding your wholeness. That's the starting point.
Come from a place of wholeness.
Whole. And then the second one.
And let other people know. Let other people be whole too.
Yeah, see their wholeness.
Absolutely.
Yes. See their wholeness.
Their wholeness. Acknowledge their wholeness. Okay, wholeness. I love that.
Yeah.
Next one.
Acknowledge separate realities.
Right, separate realities. Yeah. What you're experiencing is not what I'm experiencing. Yeah.
Right. And what you're experiencing is valid according to your worldview.
Yes. And each one is valid. Yes.
Yes. Assume positive intentions.
Yes, I love that one.
And then own your narrative versus blaming others.
Yes. Very good. Get rid of blame.
Clean up after yourself. That one's about apologizing.
Yep. Eat crow while it's still warm. Yep.
Express appreciation.
Yes. Validate people.
Yeah. And find warmth for the other person.
Yes. You have to be a little bit empathetic to do that, but But it
feels good for us.
Like
you pointed out earlier, like it feels good for us, when we find that place of warmth.
Absolutely.
Mind your mood. So just be really aware of how our state of mind is impacting really like how we're thinking about the situation. It's going to look totally different when we're in a different mood.
Yes. And know that your mood spills over onto other people. I think that's, again, taking responsibility for yourself. But, sometimes people are so surprised to find out that if they're angry, that spills over onto other people.
Yeah, don't act out your mood.
No.
If it's a negative mood.
No, don't do that.
Don't do it. Yeah.
It's called adulting.
It is. That's a big one.
Yes, it is. It's hard. It's hard to be an adult.
It's really hard. It's hard to, in that moment, it really appears like that person's being a jerk and causing this mood or this feeling that I have, to just bite your tongue and realize I can deal with this in the way that I want when I'm not reacting.
Yes.
And then we can deal with it. So it's not pushing under the rug. It's just being very mindful about how and when. And then listen deeply to understand the other person's experience. So that one's about deep listening.
Yes.
And that's
walk in another person's shoes.
Recognizing that our thinking gets in the way of really listening and hearing the other person. Yeah, listening is an art. And not only is it an art, it's an expression of love to listen deeply. I had to learn to listen more deeply. I just co-facilitated a whole workshop, 90 minutes on deep listening, but it could have easily been much longer.
Excellent. Yes.
And then the last is to communicate with clarity and kindness. And so
communicate with clarity and with kindness.
And specifically around setting, sometimes it's about setting limits, but that we can do that with clarity and kindness.
Yes. You can set limits kindly. Yes, indeed. Yes. And boundaries will set you free.
Yeah.
Boundaries are a good thing, and they're not a wall. I agree with you. They're just what is okay and what's not.
Right. Yeah.
This has been so much fun. I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
If you were going to give women who are listening, there's some men listening too, a piece of actionable counsel that they can use right here and now to be more successful, work more toward their wealth, to increase in strength who they're being while they're doing what they're doing, any of those things, what would you say?
So I'm thinking about just really being aware of the stories that we have around money in particular. And that, those stories are one way that we filter our experience. We've been talking about how our thinking creates our experience. And so that's true when it comes to our stories around money as well. And that can relate to our, how we feel about our own worth. It can relate to our experience or not of our own wholeness. And so just being aware of the story, maybe even writing it down or journaling a little bit about what that story might be for us. And then just noticing when that's showing up.
Yes, if you're not aware, you can't do anything about it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why we're titled here Money Loves Women, so that everyone's aware that money wants to come to you. And I like to have people write a love letter to money. Mm. And sometimes it's interesting that their relationship with money is very parallel to their relationship to men. Or our relationship can look very similar. So yeah, sometimes writing a letter to money gives you a lot more awareness about what's going on with you and money, such that you can examine where that came from and what the depths of that are. So that's great advice, great counsel.
And if there's a way that you see that story is interfering with your life in some way, maybe choose some particular action that's going to challenge the story, help you get outside of the story.
Yes.
Help you broaden the narrative.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Lindsay. I've learned a whole bunch of stuff today, and so have my listeners, I'm betting.
Well, thank you for having me.
So
really
thanks.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been a total pleasure. This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom for the Money Loves Women podcast. We've enjoyed talking to Dr. Lindsay Hardie today, Hardie, and she is Sierra Legacy Consulting, LLC. Thanks for coming on. I'd love to have you on again sometime. You have so many interesting things. We could do a whole podcast just on listening.
Yes, we're apologizing.
Thanks for being on. It's been a total pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This is Dr. Deborah Ekstrom, to your health, to your wealth, and to your happiness. May blessings rain down upon you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Money Loves Women podcast. Please leave us a rating and review so we know how we can improve. Visit moneyloveswomen.com to gain more insight into how to live an extraordinary life.